Hi guys, and hi Don. Just quickly gonna say, so I mean, everybody kind of knows what core is, and I think we just sort of think about it as, you know, well, I think I can speak for a couple of my kids that are motivated to try and get six packs and try and look like they're really strong. And we feel like it's really important for you guys to understand that there's a really big difference between looking strong and actual functional strength. And I think like in some ways I'm the wrong person to do the introduction, because Eric is somebody who's spent a lot of time working on core, and you may not know it to look at him now, but back in the day, he was incredibly ripped with a huge six pack. But I think he'd be the first person to say that he didn't really have a full connection between the muscles that were really important to stabilize him and to give him the most power and to prevent injury. So I think that, you know, while it's a complicated thing and it's something that maybe you guys won't get the first one or two times that you hear it, it's something that if you hear enough times and you start to try to integrate it into what you're doing, that you might see the success that gives you the connection yourself to understand how important it is and why it's so important. And Don is somebody who is a master at this and will be able to let you guys know what things you can start to look for and how you can retrain your body to have patterns that you would understand that are going to be able to integrate your core in a way that makes you a better athlete, a stronger person, and prevents injuries as well. So we're really excited to have Don joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Well, thanks for that introduction. And now, Eric, I'm really excited. I think we should circulate some pictures of Eric. Like,
you know what? While you guys talk, I will try to pull one up because I actually do have a pretty good one. So.
Just for motivation for everybody. We're all in this.
Back where I was, give myself some motivation. Do you want me to share my story, Dawn, a little bit, or do you want me just?
I'd love for you to talk about it because I think it's really key. And one of the main things is you don't know what you don't know until you know. And you're someone who knows because he was there. And your whole point of really talking to me about this was like, really trying to be proactive for your teams, and I think that's key. So why don't you talk about it a little bit, and then I'll get into it.
Sure. You know, guys, I can speak about this really passionately, and I hope that comes through to all of you because you know, putting together a split second, everything we're doing, we really want the best for all of you guys, and you know, that means to be healthy, to be injury free, and also to perform at the peak of your potential. And I think without really understanding your core, that is very difficult to do. And I think every one of you guys who's been through a split second program, hopefully has heard the term core thrown at you, you know, dozens, if not hundreds of times. However, we have not done an adequate job of telling you what that really means and how to connect to it. And it's not because we don't care. It's not because we don't think it's important. It's because it's a very complicated topic. And it's very easy to think that you are training everything correctly. Lukey, can you please stop? It's very, very interesting to think you're doing everything correctly and really not be doing it at all. And as Leslie mentioned, I had, you know,
I found it.
Oh, okay.
And you can see there. Yeah, he was really, he was very real.
Totally worth being on this Zoom now, right? Everybody agrees.
So I used to have a six pack, but I didn't have a connection to my core. And it's because when we were training, you know, we really, and I think some of the parents, hopefully I can't see all of your guys' screens, but hopefully I see some nodding from the parents to understand that we used to think we were really sophisticated with our training because we went from doing like sit-ups where, you know, somebody used to sit on our feet and we do, you know, 100 sit-ups, you know, against that resistance to doing, you know, 1,000 crunches. And we really targeted one set of muscles, which are part of your core, but they really aren't all of it. And this is what Dawn will get into later. And so for me, I had, you know, what I think, you know, most experts like Dawn would call gripping. I really had a lot of surface muscles that allowed me to, you know, cause my body to grip really hard. And I end up having some serious injuries because of it. I end up replacing both of my hips at a very early age. And a lot of that, you know, I attribute to that sort of constant need to grip because I couldn't engage my deep core muscles. And so, you know, as part of my rehab, I really did learn to connect to it. But, you know, you know, even though I was doing, you know, all this, crunches and all, eventually some planks and some other stuff, because I wasn't connecting to my deep core. I end up having sort of this, these injuries, but also I didn't perform as well as I could. So I'm sure we're all on the continuum. Nobody here, probably Dawn herself isn't the perfect, doesn't have the perfect connection, but we're all in the continuum, and most of us, I think we can get better. So, and this is an area of subtlety that, if you pay attention and you listen, you can really get better. And Dawn's got some tools that she's going to share with us. She's also developed her own e-course through a PDF that you can get, and she's actually going to make that available to you guys after, if you'd like, at 50% off her normal rate, which is great. She's also provided for you guys all of these drills that you're going to get in the XPS workouts, just because she really wants to share that message. So please listen up and hear what she has to say. And I think she has some interactive demonstrations, and try them and try and assess for yourself where you're at. So thank you, Dawn.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so, and that's unfortunate, when you hear these stories of like double hip replacement, like you say that like it's nothing, but at one point that just probably crushed your momentum in life, and as you knew it, right? Like it'll change things. And when you're out for an injury, or repetitive injuries, or back pain, it's affecting you. It's affecting your game time. It's affecting the amount of court time you have. It affects everything. It affects psychologically. So interestingly enough, in the last couple of months, I've spent a lot of time with several high performance coaches. And one of the main things that most of them were saying to me is, we rush our athletes to hit these peaks, and yet we do not provide them with the actual core strength to maintain that peak. And then we throw, physio and rehab, like a very reactive approach to them. Like, oh, now you're at this level and you're hurt, and okay, here's physio, here's that. And if you look at our top tier athletes, the amount of money we spend on physio and rehab is actually a lot of money. And because I've been doing this for so long, a lot of the stuff that comes back to me is like, oh my gosh, when you gave me those exercises, and I heard you, but didn't really do them. And then I injured myself, and now this is exactly what my physio is giving me. And it breaks my heart, because if they just did them, we'd be a lot further ahead. But our system is very reactive. We're used to being like, do our sport, go hard, get hurt, flip over here. Okay, spend some time in physio, do these tiny little exercises. Okay, go right back. And if you just do that little bit that's in between, which is exactly what we have put into your XPS training system, is that in between. It's learning that base stuff, so that when you work up and you're doing that hardcore training stuff, those deeper muscles should come on. So that's really what
I could jump in for 1 second. That I think something to relate for these guys that most of them would have seen is if you watch an NBA warm up, and I don't know how many of you guys have gotten to go to games, but sometimes you'll see it on TV too, a bit of them warming up. You see a ton of work with bands. You see them working, like maybe just stepping side to side, and almost all that work that they're doing is engaging those deep core muscles, turning them on, because it's easy, like through the process of sitting in the car for half an hour, or sitting on the plane, flying from New York to LA. For these guys, some of those muscles turn off, and so they have to actively do that. And they're professional athletes at the top of their game, so certainly we need to as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a thing called glute amnesia, and it's basically like your glutes fall asleep and forget what they're doing, and that's a thing. So the main thing to note, and this is without those warm-ups, a really good point, is it kind of boils down to mobility and stability. So you need to move well if you load something that doesn't move well. So if you don't move well through your ankles, and this is like your body's, when you squat, it's just going to be like, well, squat. And so all of a sudden your squat, instead of being normal, turns into this like weird, like bending over thing. But if you don't move well through your ankles, it's automatically going to load your knees. It's going to load your hips. It's going to load your upper backs. That strain's going to go somewhere else, because you don't have that mobility in your ankles. And often that's just stretch your calves, roll your calves out on tennis balls, that kind of thing. And they're really simple. Like, we look for these big answers, and it's often the really small stuff. So mobility is a really big one. And I'll talk about that in the core training. That's one of the things we'll cover. And the stability is the other thing. So as Leslie kind of alluded to, we have this real opinion of like, core, it's back and abs, which isn't completely untrue. It is abs and back. But as we were talking about, you can have a six pack and actually be really, really weak on the inside. So you have an outer core and an inner core, and your outer core is basically, so your six pack, your obliques come in on the side, so that's your washboard stomach, and then your back. And those muscles should be moving you. So they should be flexing you, side bending you, rotating you, extending you. Those muscles shouldn't be stabilizing you. So if you do something really simple here, if you cross your arms just wherever you're sitting, cross your arms, cross your shoulders, and round yourself forward. So if you actually round, try and rotate in that position. And then sit up nice and straight and try and rotate from that position. And this should feel a lot better than that like flex forward. So if you think of like those guys you see running the Iron Man or something, and they're six pack and they're here, you're actually fighting your body. You want your body to be able to move, to rotate, to extend, and not be into that brace position, because what happens is all of a sudden you're flexed forward and you go for a layup, or you're trying to get those arms over your head and your arm doesn't go over your head. Usually one of two things going to happen. You're either going to extend for your lower back, and that's why your lower back's sore, because the upper back doesn't move, or you're going to crank through your shoulder, and now you have a shoulder injury. And really it's all coming from A, breathing, and then B, how are you trying to stabilize? Because if you're using those outer muscles all the time to try and stabilize you, which is exactly that, like 100 crunches a day, great, but what's the function of it? Like, you're never going to have to sit yourself up 2 inches off the floor 100 times in a row. So that's your outer core. And as important as those muscles are, then you have your inner core. And you don't need to remember all these muscles. This is something that in the PDF that Eric mentioned earlier, which I'm happy to make available to you, because it basically breaks down what core is. So it explains this. It gives you little diagrams of these muscles and explains why you want to build it, how to build it. And in this particular one, I'll show you how to test your own core, and then you basically get evaluated. You either score, you score okay, or you score, do you need to work on it? And then it gives you the exercises that you should be doing based on how you're scoring. So I'm going to go through an exercise in that in a minute, but really quickly, your inner core is basically your transverse abdominis. So that's almost like an inner corset. It wraps right around you. It's your tummy flattening muscles. So that controls your pelvis. You have multifidus, which is actually what we're going to test in a second. And your multifidus are these tiny little muscles that run up and down your spine. And they should turn on before you even move. And amazingly, a lot of really high performance athletes have a lag in those muscles. So when you think of something of how fast you have to react to your side, reacting to things, if those muscles are not turning on quick enough, then there's a reason that you're going to get an ankle injury, or you're going to get back pain, and back pain is very common when that one doesn't work. So that's kind of the corset, and then you have your diaphragm on top and your pelvic floor on the bottom. So it creates almost like a cylinder inside your bodies of muscles. And if that cylinder isn't perfectly pressurized, what happens is you end up, so let's say you just don't breathe well, and most people don't know how to breathe well. You're actually pushing with your diaphragm, and the pressure's got to go somewhere, which commonly is either a pelvic floor issue or a hernia, which is really key. You don't need a hernia, like that will definitely decrease performance. So it's kind of like if you had a pop can and one of those muscles doesn't work, it's like having it when you dent a pop can and you can crush it really easily. That's sort of what your core is like if these muscles are all not functioning properly. And essentially, if you think of, when you drive by the used car sales lots and there's those things that like you blow air into and they flop around, that's kind of how your body is when it's not really well stabilized. So here's a little test to go through. So, and this is just an example of the tests we kind of do. They're really simple. So
can
if you have a chance,
Dawn, can I jump in before you go to the test?
Yeah.
Just guys, I know this is a lot, and it's but all of you guys, you really are studying basketball because you're doing it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days a week. And, this is important stuff. And I know it might sound a little bit Greek to you, multifidus and transverse abdominis, your diaphragm, your pelvic floor. And I can tell you, before I went through my rehab, I couldn't have told you what any of those muscles are or what they felt like. All I could tell you is that I could do a crunch, I could brace, and I couldn't feel any of those individual muscles. And I can tell you that once you do start to feel those, and this is what Dawn specializes in, and it's not very easy just to go in the gym and, for us to tell you guys, okay, turn on your transverse abdominis. Okay, you're not using your diaphragm enough. You've got to kind of explore that on your own. But when you do, you really can perform differently. And especially, Dawn mentioned it there, but you might not have actually heard it. It's almost the sequence with which you turn it on, because you can move, but if your movement starts with your quadricep getting really explosive and pushing off, or your hamstring, but it's pushing off against a core that hasn't turned on yet, you can lose a ton of power in that transfer. Because really what movement is about transferring the power from your muscles, your legs, through to the core of your body and moving you because of that. But if your body isn't, it isn't properly engaged, that core slightly ahead of that muscle contraction, you lose tremendous amounts of power. And it doesn't matter how powerful your quads and everything are, you're not going to jump with the same explosiveness, or you're not going to change direction defensively with the same explosiveness. So even though this is a difficult topic, really try and dig into what Dawn is saying, because it can really help you a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Yeah, and these will be explained in the XPS too. In some of the exercises, I do explain why are you doing this boring little exercise, and but that mind body connection is huge. And one of the things on top of that, of just having the patterning, because you're exactly right that we just talked about the core, so your actual inner unit. We just talked about your cylinder, which you don't have to remember the names of those muscles, but if you can think of that cylinder being perfectly pressurized. But in the back side of that core are your glutes. And if you are, and glutes are a big thing. I know right now everyone's working their glutes, but I'm talking about actually getting your deep glutes to work. Because if the outer glutes are working, they'll tend to just hold your hips and grip. And when you're getting that gripping, which is exactly what Eric was talking about, you get all this gripping. And so you get these major compensations. And those areas, until you get them to let go, it's like the eternal, oh my gosh, my hip flexors are so tight, my hip flexors, and people keep stretching their hip flexors. You can stretch your hip flexors till the end of your life. There is a reason that they are gripping. So one of the main reasons that the hip flexors will grip is that your glutes, your deep glutes, don't function properly. And if you can't get them, and so, Eric, you were talking about the warm up these NBA guys do. I went to a seminar, and it was a physio who works with a professional football team in the States. And he's like, we do this exercise every single game, every single warm up with these guys. And you basically lay them all down. I think this is somewhere in the XPS system too. And you're basically trying to hold a fart with your bum cheeks. It's the mellowest, cheesiest little exercise, but it's literally trying to get them to connect at this really deep level. And I was like, seriously, you have an entire professional football, they're big guys trying to hold a fart on the foot, and so it's really funny. And this was years ago, and he was like, our groin injuries went down 80% because we did this. And so it's just a matter of, yes, getting that patterning and making sure, hey, if we get your glutes firing, your hip flexors can back off. Because if your bum doesn't fire, those deep glute muscles don't fire, your hip flexors will take over. And they're like control freaks. And once the hip flexors want to do everything, your core just doesn't even bother. It doesn't need to, and it won't. So just, if you read the little things and why are we doing this? A lot of it is to develop power in your jumps, or to increase the speed of changing directions. And that's the whole point of this. So yeah. So thank you for that. Yeah. So why don't we go over, do you want me to go over a quick test? And then if anyone has any questions, we can go over that. And then if you want to learn more about how you can test these things, then we can talk about that.
Sounds good. I'll encourage anybody who's got questions, apart from skipping on the test, because I want everyone to do the test, but just fire it into the chat right now, because I can preload those. So yeah, sounds good, Dawn. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So if you have the ability to stand up, this is really simple. And Eric, I'd really like to know if you're multifidus, and multifidus.
I can feel
you learned a new word today. for most of you, because who the heck knows that? So again, these are the little muscles that run up your spine. So if you, right along your pant line, if you go find your spine and go right to the side of your spine, there's like a little divot right beside your spine. And so if you put, so I'm putting my right hand on my right side of my spine, and I'm just going to like shake a hand with my left hand. So it's a quick little like shake, shake, shake. And what you should feel is like a little zzz, 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 zzz. So try it on your other side, because sometimes from one side to the other will be a big difference. So try your left side and then try that. So I know for me on one side, it's like a really quick, like you really feel it. And then on the other side, it's a little less. So that's your multifidus. There'll be some people that are like, I feel nothing. If you're with someone else, yes, thank you guys. Try it on each other. Here, Leslie, check Eric for me. So if you put, yeah, so Eric, if she's on your right side, you're gonna do your left arm. And if you're on the left side of your spine, you're gonna do your right arm. So Leslie, any difference between Eric's sides?
I'm stronger, but I can feel both.
Okay, nice. Eric, you passed. You can check Leslie if you want. Anyway.
That would be, Dawn, an example though. Before I did my rehab, I had nothing. I remember somebody showing me that for a while. I couldn't even move it. Now I think about that quite a bit as I'm through the day, like, you know, feeling that engaging.
Yeah, and it's one of those, and if yours do, you'll be like, how can somebody not feel this? But I tested hundreds of athletes last fall, and I would say like 60% of them failed, at least on one side. And these are your high performance athletes. And it's mainly just, if no one's ever really told you about this, why would you know about this? So that's just, you know, a lot of what core is just being aware of what you're doing and testing it on different people. So if you have more than one person in the room, really good to try it on your friends, because you will start to, like, even though you're like, oh yeah, mine worked really well, all of a sudden you'll feel someone else and be like, oh wow, that's huge. That's like a really big muscular contraction there.
Oh, rookies.
I know.
Yeah, we noticed a big difference between the different family members here.
Okay, well, we won't throw
anybody down. Pretty good.
We won't make anybody feel bad, but I'm sure there's a few of you that are like rock stars and you're like, I crushed this. So it's just on the side of the spine, like you're almost on your spine. It's just in that little divot. Yeah, there you go. Now you got, now you're walking around, and it's a quick shake. It's not like a slow bob. It's a quick net, net, net. And all you're doing is you're initiating a movement. And so that's the kind of thing. That's, Eric, I know you've had a look at this PDF with me. I wanted to make something that, you know, I don't want you to end up in physio to find this out. And if any of you out there have been to physio and found this out, I mean, I'd love to hear your stories too. But the whole concept is to have that mind-body connection. And the other side of that mind, so one is, you have control of your body, which is awesome. And it's awesome as you get more high performance and coaches are demanding more of you, and you know, your training schedule goes up. Your body needs to be as bulletproof as possible. So that side of it's really important. The other side of it is actually the mental side, because this is not something that we talk about that much. The athletes that I've worked with that do have this really have an advantage, I would say, over anyone else, because they're like, well, I know I'm stronger than that other guy or that girl out there on the court, and it goes a long way mentally. So yeah, physically and mentally. Great.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Dawn. That was a great introduction, I think, to what that concept is, and it's really not an easy one, I think, for a lot of people to sort of understand. But hopefully that would, I think your introduction, and hopefully it'd be interesting to know how many people, maybe a little bit of feedback on the chat, guys. If you know any of you who can't feel it, or if you can, that would be great for us to know. But you know, I can tell you that. You know, diving a bit deeper into this topic right now, and then you're going to do that on the XPS. Some of you guys might choose to do that on, on Dawn's PDF. That, as you say, we'll put that on the Cobra newsletter for you guys, a link to access that. And also, there's a ton out there. There's a lot of information on the internet too, and that Dawn has it just really packaged nicely together to go through, because I think you'll see there's so many people who are understanding the importance of it in a way we never did growing up training. So definitely do that, get that as early as possible. And I think it'll make all of the stuff you're doing in the weight room, you guys are all doing with Saltis, or functional stuff that you guys are doing with us on the court, it'll help improve all of that. Because when you do a plank and that multifidus is really engaged, you'll feel that plank really differently than when it isn't, and you're just purely bracing. So I think it'll help in all that training. So is there anything else, Dawn, you want to say before to us now?
No, just, I mean, in regards to, I noticed someone just said that they commented that they felt one side really strong and they didn't feel the other side. So your body stabilizes in cross patterns. And if you think of like walking as a simple example, when you step forward with your left foot and right arm, like those are cross patterns. Or if you step forward with your left leg and throw with your right arm, the cross patterns are really key. And what that's saying is you're really good at stabilizing yourself on one side and you're not on the other. So you think about running down the court and you are running on both legs. So it's right, left, which means you're strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak. And what that translates into is compensations. So you'll, all of a sudden a straight pelvis becomes a rotated pelvis, or one hip becomes really, really tight because you're constantly, deferring to one side. So there's a reason why we're evaluating these, we're testing these, or we're talking about these muscles, and you want as much even in your body as possible to have the best performance. Great.
Well, Dawn, maybe we can open up to a couple questions, and maybe I'll start with how different is it for guys and girls? Is it a really different training, or is it mostly almost all the same? That how you teach core connection?
Yeah, I mean, so guys have pelvic floors too, and that's something that we don't talk about yet very much, but they do. So I think it's important that we start that conversation. Yeah, it's the cueing is different, and you'll see that in your XPS drills. So for some of them, for actual turning on your pelvic floor, for the ladies, it would be like pulling your pelvic floor on, or a Kegel seems to make sense, or an elevator floor. For men, it's more like you're walking into cold water and you're drawing everything up inside of you, and it's all happening from hips and below for both sexes. But the cueing tends to be different, because when you say to a man, turn your pelvic floor on, it means nothing. so for guys, it's a little different, and it's tough when you're, for older people that just have hurt themselves more, they tend to want to connect more. But the younger athletes that I've worked with from all ages, like 9 and up, where they really are like, ooh, can I make this tiny little muscle, whether it's in your neck or your mid back or your deep pelvis, turn on. It's amazing when you start having control of your body at that level, how much stronger of an athlete you can be. You can actually manipulate your outcome way more than just going for it. And your point on planks, by the way, planking is like one of the worst exercises. As much as it's one of my favorite exercises, it's one of the most poorly done exercises, because people compensate so hugely. So there's so much more of that, like outer core or lats being used, or muscles that shouldn't even be involved with the abdominals. So the core stuff will really help clean up planks.
Maybe people aren't ready for it, who are doing it. They don't have enough of a connection to their core, and is that what you're saying with why plank isn't necessarily a good exercise?
Yeah, there's a ton of people that are just way too weak, and you look at something like these burpee challenges that go around, hey, do 100 burpees. Like, many people's cores are not strong enough to do one burpee or one push-up or one 10-second plank, let alone a whole bunch. And you'll get through 100. And if you're fairly strong, you got shoulder strength and everything else, but you got to remember there's going to be compensation somewhere else. So all of a sudden you have a shoulder injury or your low back hurts, and that's where we get into that. And this is why, I appreciate you talking about this, just trying to keep your athletes out of injury. I mean, that's everything, right?
Well, hopefully one thing that'll help these guys is, like you said, it's not the most exciting thing, compared to watching a highlight of somebody crossing over and dunking on somebody. But I think if you look at the top athletes in the game, almost all of them are really in tune and connected and working at that really specific little, micro level. And I know some of you guys have heard me share that story before, but I'll share it quickly again that, when I was playing overseas in Europe, one summer I came back and I had a bad injury to an ankle, and I was out at UBC doing their physiotherapy every day for probably 6 weeks or so in between seasons. And it was actually the season before Steve Nash became the MVP of the NBA. And he happened to be out working with the physios at the same time I was. And the amount, like, this is, a 6'2", fairly average athlete Canadian guy who wins MVP the next year. And the amount of focus, I'd say 90% of the work he was doing was either on his core or shooting. And they were combined, actually. It was his very precise movement and while shooting as well. And it was all to do with his core. And that's the kind of level that all those top athletes are working at now, in a way that just wasn't the case 25 years ago. So it should be inspiring for you guys to connect on that level. I have one more question before we let you go, Don. We actually have Adriano here. I was going to ask a few questions just for and then a quick bit of trivia. But the one question I had is you mentioned that, the plank being a little bit of a, like, maybe an overload exercise that people aren't ready for. Do you feel that in general? Like, how do you feel about, like, these core workouts where people are doing 20 minutes of, and I maybe use core in air quotes, but, a ton of crunches, and then, a 1 minute plank, and then, like, it's nothing but, like, repeating that. Is that a net positive, or do you see more damage than good by that way, and that people should really start with more specific exercises and much less volume?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to burst anybody's bubble, because I'm always excited when people are just trying to do something and they're moving, which is more than not moving. But your discs hate flexion, and definitely loaded flexion. So when you're crunching, that's all flexion of your discs. So as much as, like you said, you're going to get a six pack, there's a tiny little crunch that doesn't load your disc, but other than that, it does. And I think a sit up is a functional move, but I don't think you need to do 100 every day. So, it's interesting you asked that. So when COVID hit, I started doing these live core classes, and then out of the live core classes, I actually created another platform that's straight up core classes. And, people always jump on and they're like, where should I start? And I'm like, you need to start at the very base one and try it, and then go from there. And so far, absolutely every person that's written me back has been like, oh my gosh, I did the first basic core and it kicked my butt. But it is bringing it right down to a base level. And then the feedback comes like the next week or two, and as they get into it and they're like, oh my gosh, I have never felt a side plank like that, or now my side plank doesn't hurt my shoulder, or now when I do. So what it does is, when you get those deep muscles on properly, when you are doing your more advanced stuff. So by the way, on the XPS system, there are some more advanced, like the cross crawl log roll is a hard exercise. And if you haven't figured out your deep core muscles, you're going to make a mess of that one. You're going to get some really tight hip flexors, and it's not going to work for you. So absolutely. Are you going to work against yourself when you're doing, these core things? And there's a lot of stuff out there, and I can't say it's all good. And sometimes, it's these people that have 4 million likes, but that doesn't mean it's good and good for you. So yeah, like you said, it's not all about the flash, and I know this isn't like a cool sort of topic, but it becomes cool if you start connecting to it. Like, it is something that you can control. And most of us hate not being in control of things. That's where things fall apart. So the fact that you can actually start having control of your body in a new way, and it will make a huge difference to your higher, to your bigger drills, whether it's a basketball specific drill that's just a more complicated drill or a more complicated abdominal exercise. If you get those really deep small ones on first, huge difference in how all of a sudden sit-ups are like, oh, that's a totally, it feels totally different in your body.
Great.
That's my
Okay.
answer.
No, well, thank you, Dawn. So these guys will send out the Cobra newsletter. We'll send out information about your course. They're going to get the drills in the in their XPS workouts. How else can they connect to you? Maybe you can just tell them, and we'll send that out as well in the newsletter. But how else can they see your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is simplycorefit.com. And on there, so I basically do one-to-ones in person, or I do one-to-ones online, or you can do this do-it-yourself, the DIY program, which is the test your core, and then it spits out a program. But I'm totally accessible for questions, and I'd love to hear the questions. It's really good to connect. So that's with parents and athletes. You can get me on Facebook at Simply Core. Simply Core Fit, or Simply Core Fit on Instagram. So feel free to message me. I am a person on the other end, and it's important to talk about this stuff. So don't feel like anything's ever a bad question or an embarrassing thing to talk about. This is key. I mean, it's crazy. You know, you can get into incontinence and everything else, but it exists in athletes, and it's not something we necessarily share or talk about, but it happens. And there's a 13-year-old field hockey player, young girl, that had incontinence, which is basically not holding your pee, for anyone that doesn't know that term. But yeah, and she had a six-pack and everything else, but literally she was pushing on her pelvic floor. But I mean, to look at her as an athlete, she could have been on the cover of some, you know, women's health magazine or whatever, because she looks so ripped. So no matter what the thing is, if it's like, oh, my back always hurts here, or I have this issue and I'm afraid to go back to these exercises, or what should I do for this? XPS will really cover how to improve your jumping and that kind of thing, your agility through these exercises. But please, yeah, check in with me, Simply Core Fit.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Dawn.